this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Very, very much appreciated. This week's episode of the show, I thought it was about time to do an episode of the show on Springbank. Obviously, I get lots of viewers of the Springbank episodes of the show because you're all committed. Is that the right word? Mad, possibly. Yeah. No, lovely people at the end of the day. No, so yes, Springbank. I thought, let's have a look at Hazelburn. I haven't done a full episode of the show on Hazelburn for quite some time. I think it was about just over a year, in actual fact. I mean, prior to my good friend Ian Sunderland giving me samples on a regular basis, and he supplied all the samples for today's episode of the show. I used to occasionally get the odd Hazelburn sample, and I'd put it in with the sort of like an overall Springbank tasting. So it's really nice to be able to do sort of like an entire episode of the show dedicated to that particular spirit. And whiskey just never ceases to sort of like amaze me at the end of the day. I don't think I'll ever get bored of tasting whiskey. I receive samples, and there's always that sort of frisson of excitement, I suppose, when I get to taste something brand new, or even more so when I get to taste something that I know of, but maybe different cask, something. It's just always fun, and I'm continually sort of amazed at how how the same process, in essence, given a few little tweaks here and there, ends up with a completely radically different style of spirit, and triple distillation is no different. I mean, obviously Auchentoshan is the sort of archetypal I suppose triple distilled spirit, but in their third distillation they take a quite a narrow cut, I believe. I think it's somewhere between 80 and 82%, and so it's quite narrow and quite early as well. Hence you end up with this light sort of spirit with a kind of Turkish delight kind of rose petal, that kind of character. And yet then you have Hazelburn, for example, which again triple distilled, but the cut point is a more of a regular cut point, round about sort of 75, 65, and you again ending up with a spirit that has the sort of the DNA, I guess, of a triple distilled spirit. It has a little bit of that rose petal, but it's generally a lot fuller, a lot oilier, and a lot more of a weightier spirit, and hence completely and utterly different to Auchentoshan. And then you have distilleries that, generally speaking, don't triple distill, but occasionally do it just for the hell of it. There's things like distilleries like Ben Romag, the English distillery, just fascinating to see at the end of the day. But anyway, as we've got quite a number of cask strength samples to get through today, I'm going to keep the obvious waffle to a minimum, and just crack on and let you know what I'm tasting today. Right, okay, so as I said, a big thank you to Ian for all of the samples for today's episode of the show. Your kindness is just, just blows me away, it has to be said. So we're going to kick off with a 12-year-old. This is a Cadenheads Authentic Collection bottling. It's a recharred bourbon barrel, distilled in 2007, bottled in 2020 at 51.9%. Bottling number 2 is a cage bottling. This is a 2001 distilled Hazelburn, January 2001, bottled in February of 2019, a fresh bourbon barrel, and bottled at 47%. Third bottling is a distillery bottling. This is the 2022 21-year-old. The code was 2282. It was 70% bourbon, 30% sherry, and bottled in April of last year. Right, so on to number 4. This is again another distillery bottling, a single cask bottling, which was for the Italian market. It was bottled in January of 2018, distilled in December of 2007, 10 years of age, refill Sauternes, and bottled at 55.4%. And the penultimate bottling is another Cadenheads bottling. This is in their Wood Range sherry cask. It's a 16-year-old Hazelburn, distilled in 2005, bottled in 2021 at 58%. Now, and on to the last one, a peated one. No. Do you know, I've kind of had this fascination about what a peated Hazelburn would be like, and the distillery wouldn't have to go the whole hog and produce triple distill a peated mash. You could finish it in, say, ex-long row casks. Well, I mean, that would be really quite cool. I mean, we know, as from tasting whiskies that have been finished in ex-peated casks, that they can pick up an awful lot of peat character, and why not? Well, you could even go, stick them into ex-Islay quarters, or from a certain distillery if you can get them, which I'm sure you can. But when you've got sort of like peated casks already on site, ex-long row casks, I think that would be quite an intriguing thing to do. Maybe they've done it and it's just never seen the light of day. Who knows? But anyway, so the final one is not a peated Hazelburn. It's actually a port matured Hazelburn. It's an 8-year-old private cask, bottled for the Malt House Islay, Tokyo. Fresh port cask 1006, distilled in 1997, bottled in 2005. It's 8 years old and was bottled at 56.2%. So should be an interesting one to finish with, I think. So lots of different ABVs, casks and what have you. So let's kick off with the Cadenheads 12-year-old. Right, okay, so let's start with the Cadenheads Authentic Collection 12-year-old. Let's see what nose gives us on this one, shall we? Oak is quite noticeable. It's obviously being recharred. I'm getting a lot of that charred oak character up front. There's a little bit of that sort of rose petal, a little bit of rawness. There's a little bit of a soapy note as well. Some quite fleshy barley, apricot, white fruit, nice oiliness, a touch of Campbelltown, salt, but that oak is really quite aggressive, and I often find this with recharred casks. They can be, well, back in the day, certainly, if you go back to, 10 years ago, when the STR cask was sort of starting to be being used, the oak came across in quite a bitter kind of character, and I was thinking, obviously, this kind of removing of the sort of inner layer, the sort of and recharring is kind of just making those tannins quite bitter. I don't find the bitterness nowadays. I guess it's probably a lot down to the cooperages basically becoming more adept at sort of doing this kind of stuff, but more often than not the oak just comes across really very, very aggressive, and sometimes, like in this instance, a little too aggressive. Anyway, let's see what that's like. That's tight. That's tighter than an axe chuff, as they say. Yeah, not getting a huge amount other than alcohol. I mean, again, charred oak is quite prevalent. Apricot, fleshy fruit. It's a slight kind of, there's a slight plasticky kind of note to the sort of the marzipan. And again, I'm just sort of not really loving this aggressive oak character. I mean, although Hazelburn has a bit more guts and a bit more, cojones than, say, Auchentoshan, for example, You know, it's still a triple distilled spirit at the end of the day. So let's put a little drop of water with it. Let's see if that, say, maybe knocks down the oak a little bit. It'll certainly taint the alcohol anyway. It's really brought out the vanilla. It's very vanilla'd now. There's a little bit more barley. There's a touch of lime, possibly. It's a little bit more integrated now. The oak is not quite so aggressive and tannic, and I am getting a little bit more of the spirit character, which is good. It's a little bit simpler now, but it's maybe a little bit more harmonious. So yeah, winning and losing, I guess, with this one with a drop of water. Let's see what the pass right now. Sweeter, less aggressive, but still very vanilla, very soft, very simple. It's got a lovely mouth-filling characteristic to it. A little bit of honey as well. It's just a little bit of a disappointment, it has to be said. It's kind of like it's too aggressive, too much oak, too much aggressive oak, diluted. It becomes a little bit simple and a little bit kind of, you know, I mean, I don't know what it retailed for, but you know, it's a good one to start with, I think. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 17-year-old cage bottling, fresh bourbon barrel. Let's see what the nose gives us on this, enjoy. Now that's lovely. That really is a lovely nose. Again, fleshy fruit, overripe apricot, pear, peach, little bit of banana, touch of fish oils, a little bit of vibrant spice. Now, I mean, you could argue it's a little confected, possibly, but to me, this is a much more appealing nose than the previous one. Now, it doesn't really feel like 17, and this is the thing with triple distilled spirits. They do often belie their age. They don't really sort of show their age. But this is just absolutely gorgeous. It is a lovely nose. A lovely citric note coming through. A little bit of milkiness from the oak. It's just so better balanced than the Cadenheads. And absolutely delightful. See what the pass on. Quite drying finish, sort of lime sherbet, sort of got this kind of sweet sour interplay happening on the finish. It kind of opens up again, quite fleshy, quite fruity, sort of apricot, pear, peach. Oak is a little bit more noticeable on the mid palate. It gets a bit grippy. There's quite a chunk of vanillins, a little bit of spice, and then, like I said, it comes into this sort of lovely, sort of sweet, sour, citric finish. I like that. I thought that was a very, very impressive bottling. It had sort of complexity, it had integration, it had length. Yeah, that was right, okay, so let's move on to the 21. It's a bit of a funny order I'm kind of doing it in, but it's more, I'm doing it more in a kind of stylistic manner, I suppose. So starting off with the bourbon, then we'll move into the sherry, then the sort of like the different cask types. So I've kind of, to a certain extent, sort of ignored the age statements, but let's see what nose gives on this one, shall we? Just for 30% sherry, it is kind of punching well above its weight. It's quite raw, quite stringent, green Oloroso, green olives, touch of marzipan, vanilla. a little bit of sawdust, a touch of barley. It's lacking a bit of sweetness here, to be frank. It's kind of, that sort of herbal astringency is a little bit sort of too dominant, and there's not enough sweetness or something else to kind of balance that one up. And it's just sort of like, you know, sitting in the glass, and that green wood character is becoming more and more evident. And like I said, for just being 30% of the blend, it really is kind of like kicking, you know, punching above its weight. It's okay. There's just enough vanilla. There's just enough of something other than sherry happening. But I'm kind of not. I'm not kind of sort of. I'm not getting excited about this, to be bluntly honest with you. Let's see what it passes like. Same with the palate, to be honest. Again, that sherry is quite dominant. It's bitter. There's quite a bit of tannin on the mid palate, and it's quite right. Sorry about that. The interruption there. So back to the palate. Quite dry, quite tannic, quite bitter. Like I said, that 30% of sherry cask were really kind of punching above its weight. There's a little bit of that slightly sort of, well, you guys that love the sort of slightly dirty Campbelltown funkiness would obviously love that. There's an element of that certainly in the finish, and like I said, it kind of is not particularly exciting to be honest, and I just found the sherry just to be that little bit too intrusive for me personally. But you know, anyway, that's right, okay, so let's move on to the 10-year-old single cask. This is Refill Sauternes. Plenty of Sauternes character. Raw honey, marmalade, barley, touch of marzipan. Again, there's a slight sort of, and I'm being really, really critical here, there's a slight plasticine kind of note. I mean, I love the complexity. There is obviously, it has some spirit character, there's some dried fruits, there's some barley, there's rose petal, a little bit of earth, a touch of vanilla. I mean, it is more kind of skewed towards the Sauternes with that kind of, but it's kind of like it's not a soft, sweet Sauternes kind of note. It's a slightly rawer kind of Sauternes cask note. Not the most raw Sauternes cask character I've ever come across, but we're in that slightly rawer kind of woodier character. Which, you know, it sort of has its appeal, it has to be said, you know. If it just didn't quite have that plasticky note, I'd be, you know, really impressed. Anyway, let's see what the parts are. Raw honey, tannins, dark spice, dark sultanas, dried apple, quite masked. There's a bit of a fizziness on the tongue, possibly. A touch of fishiness as well. It's quite close, quite masked, not particularly sort of giving up an awful lot. Again, we're talking more about the sort of the Sauternes cask character as opposed to sort of spirit character. I'm going to put a little drop of water with it and see whether that opens things out. Not quite as raw, I will give you. There's a little bit more of that sort of marmalade-y kind of note. There's a touch more sweetness, possibly a little bit of lime. Yeah, it's not changed a huge amount with water, it has to be said, but it's probably just taken an edge off the rawness. Let's see what the part's like now. Yep, the balance is slightly better. Again, it's taken that slight rawness away, or the sort of raw Sauternes cask note. A little softer, a little bit more honeyed, sort of honeyed kind of marmalade kind of note happening. Touch more spirit character, a little bit of rose petal, some fish oils. I mean, yeah, I think putting a little drop of water with that has certainly sort of made a great difference to it. Less raw, more palatable. Yeah, okay, I can live with that one. I think that's not too bad. Right, okay, so let's move on to the second of the two Cadenheads bottlings. This is the Hazelburn Sherry Cask. Let's see what the nose gives on this. Enjoy. Yeah, that's a sherry monster. Okay, so it's herbal oloroso, mint, menthol, green fruit, walnut, licorice. Do I get any distillery character? No, not an iota. There's a bit of marzipan, there's a lot of sweet raisinated fruit, and it's kind of like, what's the point? I mean, it's sherry. It's sherry and alcohol. I mean, I know I kind of bang on and on about the whole concept of balance, but I just really don't see the point. Because I don't get any distillery character. It could come from anywhere. All right, there's a little bit of a fishiness happening there, which might well think, if you were tasting this blind, might put you in Campbelltown, but to me, it's just frankly boring as hell. And I was tasting. What was I tasting last night? It was I forget which distillery it was now. It was a single cask, Oloroso, possibly Blair Athol, something like that. And it was Oloroso finished, and it just stunk of Oloroso. It tasted of Oloroso, and I was just going, well, again, I don't find that interesting. There's no nuance, there's no light and shade. It's just kind of one-dimensional. And although this is not a sort of a dark sherry monster, it's still a sherry monster at the end of the day, because that's the only characteristic of this spirit. Let's see what the pass up. Again, Oloroso, dried raisinated fruit. Not nice citric lift on the mid palate, touch of menthol, walnut, dried raisins, dried fruit, citrus peel, bitter spice, bitter licorice, dark licorice, kind of a little bit mass. I mean, I'm going to put a little drop of water with it, see whether that does an awful lot. Well, it may well mitigate some of the sherry, but I think it's probably unlikely. It's all a bit rather homogeneous now, to be frank. It's kind of just sort of sherry, and it's soft, and it's kind of yeah. Let's see what the pass like. Sweeter, a little bit more spice maybe. It's an almost kind of like rum-like note happening now, which is quite interesting. But again, it's all pretty much cask orientated. There's no real spirit character or distillery character whatsoever. And for me, it's just not floating my boat at all. Right, okay, and on to the final bottling of this afternoon. This is the 8-year-old private cask bottle from Malt House, Islay, Tokyo. I think I saw it on an auction site, which had gone for what, 320 quid? Oh, better be bloody good, that's all I can say. Anyway, let's see what nose is. Dusty, sort of red fruits, earthy, red cherry, berry. Quite robust in actual fact, really malty, sort of chunky, almost Foursquare. Not Foursquare, rum Foursquare, as in sort of Foursquare. Touch of barley, some fish, coffee, strawberry. Yeah, okay, strawberries. Citrus peel. Okay, yeah, I can kind of I can roll with this. It's got a reasonably good balance. I mean, again, we are a little bit more in the sort of port end of the spectrum, which is, I suppose, not a surprise considering it spent 8 years in a fresh port cask. Yeah, I can just about, I can live with this. This is okay. Nice spiciness. Let's sort of pass up. Jesus, that bitters. That's kind of grabbing you by the ghoulies, it has to be said. That's really intense. Sort of black, red, cherry, berry fruits. Tannic, edgy, intense, alcoholic, masked, bitter. I mean, really, really bitter. That alcohol, the ABV is certainly enhancing that bitterness. There's a touch of menthol. It's intense. I'll give you that. 300 odd quid? No, definitely not. Let's put a little drop of water. Let's see whether that is going to sort of just even things out a little bit. I mean, the nose was nice. The nose had some balance. The palate, well, it was just sort of, obviously the alcohol was kind of enhancing all the cask attributes, and yeah, okay, I'm getting a little bit more spirit note, but it's still fairly port orientated. Bit of red fruit now. It's kind of in a sort of, I would almost go as far as saying no man's land to an sense. But yeah, I mean, the nose I think isn't too bad. Let's see what the palate's like. That's more approachable. The port isn't quite so intense, but it's adding a little bit more of a sweetness now. It's not as overtly tannic. There's a little bit of tan in there, gives it a nice kind of structure, but it's not sort of overtly bitter now. It's just opened up. There's a lot more flesh on its bones. There's more distillery character. There's more apricot. There's more fish oils. The port is relegated relatively to the sort of like the edges of the palate. There's still a nice spiciness. The finish there is a little bitterness there, but it's not getting sort of, I'm not getting bent up a shape about it. You know, it's kind of, I don't mind a little oak bitterness. Certainly right on the finish, it's kind of just adds another dimension. When it's overtly bitter and sort of like, you know, kind of like, you know, that's possibly a little bit too much, but you know, I think that's kind of nicely softened out, and you know, overall I think that is actually not a bad bottling at all. 300 quid, I don't think so, but then, you know, that's a secondary market, isn't it, for these kind of things at the end of the day. But I think if you had, if you bought a bottle of this or managed to taste it, I think you'd find it quite enjoyable. So yeah, not a bad one to finish off. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. Firstly, and again, a big thank you to my good friend Ian Sunderland for all the samples for today's episode of the show. I think overall interesting. Maybe I've been a little bit critical, possibly, but that's my job at the end of the day. You know, as I say, not everything smells of roses in the whiskey world. Sometimes it smells of. Well anyway, let's just sum today's episode of the show, shall we? So the Cadenheads 12-year-old, I kind of liked that. I thought it was really very, very pleasant. The oak was a bit too aggressive, possibly. This is the thing with recharred casks; they can be overtly aggressive. Little drop of water kind of sort of mitigated that to a certain extent, but obviously again made it a little bit simpler and a little bit softer. And yeah, but overall, it wasn't too bad. I thought the standout bottling was the cage bottling, the 17-year-old. I mean, not because it was 17, but because the balance was absolutely spot on. It was a fresh bourbon barrel, but it didn't stink of fresh bourbon. I didn't get all this kind of sweet corn and all this kind of stuff. It was really nicely integrated. The spirit had more fleshiness, more fruit than the Cadenheads bottling, and just overall it was just a lot more appealing at the end of the day. The 21. Again, it was kind of like a sort of a yeah, right, okay kind of bottling. The sherry kind of punched above its weight. It was a little bit too aggressive, a little bit too bitter. And at the end of the day, we are talking about a triple distilled spirit, and it doesn't matter whether it's kind of the cut points are sort of early or late or whatever. I mean, again, it's a triple distilled spirit. It's going to have to be handled with care when it comes down to use of oak. And although there was only 30% of sherry casks used in this particular bottling, they were just so dominant, and it just turned out to be kind of like a yeah, okay. The Italian 10-year-old refill Sauternes. I mean, yeah, okay, it was okay. I mean, like I said, I've had rawer Sauternes cask matured whiskies. A little bit of water kind of softened it out a bit, made it a bit simpler possibly. But and overall, yeah, it was quite pleasant. The Cadenhead sherry, well, yeah, okay, it was a sherry monster at the end of the day. I mean, I know there are people out there that sort of love the sherry monsters, but to me, it's not just sherry. It's kind of it's just oak. If you're it's the same as sort of like the first Cadenheads bottling. It was too much oak. It was too aggressive, and the balance was lost. And this is what I want from a whiskey. I want character of the spirit, character of the wood, to just sort of like, work together. I don't want one to outshine the other. Well, sometimes it's maybe not such an issue if the character of the spirit is more dominant than the character of the wood. I mean, that's just, life. But when it's the other way round and you're just kind of like going, well, I can't, it could come from anywhere. It just doesn't interest me at all. It doesn't excite me at all. And the final bottling, the private port cask, yeah, that was again, little drop of water, kind of opened it all out, sort of softened it, less kind of port character per se once you put a little drop of water with it, and it just sort of made the balance a little bit better. And as I keep going on and on about it, for me, the balance of the whiskey is possibly the most important character. In my personal opinion, it's something that I look for all the time. I mean, I know other people look for other things, well, which is fine. Yeah, we're all different. We all have different palates. We all have different tastes. But for me, like I said, sort of balance to me is probably the most sort of important aspect of a spirit. And yeah, okay, it maybe lived a little bit in the sort of the port end of the spectrum, but not too far in that it had gone over to the dark side. So overall, yeah, that was not too bad. So anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. No idea what's going to be happening next week. I'll probably figure that one out at some point during the week. But anyway, as for today, all that's left to say is good afternoon and good gramming.